Okay, I'd just like to take a few minutes to walk you through thesis paper 2 and talk about what's involved and to really give you some pointers for what the question's asking you for. So, under what conditions are we morally entitled to disobey the law? That's the question that I want your thesis paper to respond to. So you should have a direct answer to that question, and you can put that statement, that answer to that question in the introduction and talk about how you're going to approach it. So make sure that question's your focus. Be sort of precise about how you want to answer that question. All right, and it says discuss with reference to the views of Thoreau, Gandhi, Eric Fromm, Susan B. Anthony, and Martin Luther King, at least 3 on the question of civil disobedience. So we will have looked at all 5 of them. What I want you to do is to pick 3 and to analyze those 3 and also to develop your own position in relation to those 3 and the 3 positions that you select. All right, so your answer to this question must involve the successful completion of 2 distinct tasks. And as you see, there's an analysis task and there's a critical thinking task, which is going to be you taking a position, explaining and defending your position, giving arguments to defend that position and explaining why it's plausible. All right, so the analysis, the first thing, I want you to pick 3 out of these 5 that we've looked at, and in your analysis make sure you outline the position of each. So explain Thoreau's position in relation to Eric Fromm and King or Gandhi, what they thought about civil disobedience, their arguments for it, their position, what their reasoning was. So identify the arguments they use to support each position, and explain the differences between them that emerge from those sort of differences in position. And we talked about some of those differences, right? Thoreau is very has a kind of individualist approach, sort of it's about withdrawing cooperation. Gandhi sort of turns it into a much more sort of social movement thing where it's a sort of it's part of group conflict. Eric Fromm thinks very generally about disobedience. Susan B. Anthony has a specific argument about the Constitution and the Declaration and natural rights. And King sort of draws on Gandhi and Thoreau and others and sort of develops this idea of just laws. So think about the arguments, be specific, and use the text to draw out their position. Right, so I want to see you getting into the text. I want to see you knowing your way around these readings and sort of drawing out the substance of the positions, which means the precise arguments that they use to talk about civil disobedience. All right, so that's the task for the analysis, is to explain their positions, explain sort of the relation, some of the relations between them in terms of how they differ, maybe how they're similar as well, and sort of analyze their positions. All right, so the second big thing I want you to do is to take a position, and of course that will be your thesis, that will be your answer to the question, under what conditions are we morally entitled to disobey the law. You can use, you can agree with one of the people we've mentioned, one of the people you talk about. You could say, I agree with King because I think, for whatever reason, I agree with Anthony, I agree with Fromm. So your position could be in agreement to one of those people. Your position could also be taking elements from a number of positions and sort of arguing that a number of positions are successful. You could, of course, take your own position and sort of have your own answer that maybe leans on some of these positions but is a bit different. But whichever position you take, make sure it's clear, make sure you're precise and you have a direct answer to the question, and make sure that you provide arguments to support your position. All right, so say why it's persuasive, give arguments, give examples as well that sort of support your position. And we've talked about concrete cases. We've looked at sort of, concrete cases, Gandhi and the Salt March, and sort of different historical cases of civil disobedience. So use those cases, find out have a look at what's going on today. Is there anything that supports what you're saying? There's a lot you can draw in this argument, and I think if you do that, it'll make a strong substantive paper and show that you're sort of aware of how your arguments relate to positions that people are taking and things that people are doing. So be aware of the history of cases of civil disobedience, but also things that are happening today. Remember that it involves an act of law breaking. It's not just protest, but as long as you remember that, you can sort of draw in a lot of other things to help make the case. So give reasons why your position is defensible. Obviously, what's good about it, what's how does it sort of how does it come across as legitimate and defensible? State possible objections to your view. Defend your position by showing how you can defeat one of these objections. I think this is an important thing to think about. A really good thing to do in a thesis paper is to show that you know what your opponent would say to the argument that you're developing. So you anticipate what your opponent would say in relation to your position. How would they sort of oppose it? For example, somebody might say, and we looked at some of these arguments against civil disobedience earlier on, right? So they might say, well, if it's a democracy and there's majority rule, then why do you need to break the law? It's unnecessary. Somebody else might say, it leads to more harm than good. It leads to chaos. It leads to social disruption. So think about those arguments we talked about and see if you can find an objection that's kind of targeted, that might be a strongish objection to your view, right? And then state the objection and then say how you would respond to it. So you can say something like, so this is what opponents argue. I'm going to show why that argument doesn't work and why civil disobedience, in my understanding, is still the strongest position, and then show how the objection doesn't work, right? So giving arguments to support your position, thinking about examples, historical and contemporary, whatever you want to argue, and think of a possible objection and showing how you can defeat the arguments of your opponents in your essay. So if you do some of that, it'll be a strong argumentative essay. So, and think about how you can build those elements into it, right? So we're still looking at 4 to 5 pages, same as before, in the same sort of process, the same ideas that we did in the first paper. So yeah, do your best with it. Be concrete. Make sure you remember, right, that our major focus in philosophy, as we talked about, is on the arguments, right? We can talk about some of the history and the way things sort of developed, and that's all relevant and often supports arguments, right? But our main thing is the arguments about civil disobedience. That's what we're interested in analyzing, and that's what we're taking a position on.